Hello, everybody. I think we're waiting on one more or two more people, so we'll go ahead and let them get in while I get my slides up. You could put in the chat, please, if you can see the slides all right. Great. Awesome. All right, then we will go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this webinar today on familial domestic servitude, recognizing it as a non-first responder professional. My name is Rhianna Nicely. I'm a Policy and Research Partnerships Officer at Unseen UK, and I'm joined today by my colleague Juliet Odaro and a member of our Survivor Consultant Group, who will remain anonymous for safety purposes. For those who don't know about us, Unseen is a national charity based in Bristol. We provide direct support to survivors of modern slavery through the Victim Care Contract, and we run the UK Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, which we'll definitely be talking about today as a key signpost for anyone affected by exploitation. Please be aware that we will be recording so that we can share this webinar on YouTube, so please do keep your cameras off during the presentations. We will stop the recording for the Q&A session, so do feel free to unmute and turn your camera on to ask any questions that you might have. So today is all about familial domestic servitude, but our focus on domestic servitude is part of a larger national lottery-funded project that we are running to engage hard-to-reach communities at risk of exploitation, providing them with guidance on how to protect themselves and how to seek help if needed. This work is co-produced with the Unseen Survivor Consultants, some fantastic people who we work with who have lived experience of modern slavery, using their insights and on exploitation that often goes unnoticed, along with data from the Modern Slavery Helpline and emergent trends in modern slavery. We will be engaging 15 communities over 5 years, and familial domestic servitude is our second community. We've used the Greater West Midlands as a focal point for initial stakeholder engagement, but the materials produced for this community are relevant to stakeholders and beneficiaries across England. Domestic servitude is a form of modern slavery in the UK and the most under-identified. So we thought it useful to start off on a very quick outline of what modern slavery is and what it looks like in the UK. Modern slavery is a crime that happens all around us all the time, but lots of people don't know about it. They might see some signs and know that something isn't right, but they might only notice a few things and not what's going on behind the scenes. So it's very underrecognized. It's also underreported because people are afraid of what will happen if they tell someone or that they're being exploited. Other people might see some signs of it happening, but worry that if they report something that they saw, they would be overreacting or making things worse for the person in a harmful situation. And it's hidden in plain sight. When people hear the term modern slavery, they sometimes think this must mean that people are locked up and hidden from view. But victims and survivors are often out in the public workplaces, working alongside colleagues who have no idea that they are being controlled or exploited. Because these methods of control are often invisible things, such as debt, threats to them or their families, or control of their documents. Modern slavery is an umbrella term that encompasses the crimes of slavery, servitude, forced labor, and human trafficking. It's any work or service that someone is forced to do under the threat of some form of punishment. Someone can be said to be in a modern slavery situation if they are forced to work, if they are owned or controlled by an employer, if they are treated as a commodity, or if they have restrictions made on their freedom. There's an estimated 130,000 people living in a situation of modern slavery in the UK at any given time. Every year, more and more people are identified and facilitated into support through what's called the National Referral Mechanism. Last year, there were over 23,000 people referred for support. What this tells us is that we're getting better at identifying victims and getting them entry into support. But as you can see, we're still very far short of that 130,000 people we need to reach. I will now hand over to our survivor consultant to handle the next bit.
Hello everyone, I'm a survivor consultant at Unseen. Before we look at the data, I would like to talk about the issue of prevalence and underreporting more broadly. Like one of the biggest challenges we with the domestic servitude is that we do not know its true scale. What we do know is that likely significantly underreported. Unlike other forms of exploitations that may occur in public settings, domestic servitude often takes place within the private homes, within the trusted family or intimate relationships. This make it much harder for others to see what is happening and for the victims to recognize that they are experiencing exploitation. Like many victims may view their situation as a family obligation, a cultural expectation, or simply part of their role within the household. So other may fear the consequences of speaking out, especially if they are financially dependent on the people exploiting them, or they if they have the concerns about their immigration status, housing, or the children. So, like how we can prevent it is and the helpline data. As you can look specifically at the modern slavery and exploitation helpline data helps us understand some of the patterns we are seeing. In 2025, the helpline recorded 115 domestic servitude cases involving 161 potential victims. These cases represented around the 6% of all the cases reported to the helpline and around only 3% of all the potential victims identified. So, when we examine recruitment methods, a clear pattern is the largest group of victims had been recruited or drawn into exploitation through the family relationships, accounting for the 43 potential victims. The second largest group is involved intimate partners or a marriage propositions, accounting for the 31 potential victims. So this is a particularly important because it challenges more common assumption about the modern slavery. Many people think that exploitation is carried out by the strangers or the criminal networks, but in these cases, the exploitation often begins with the trusted relationships. Family members, partners, or in laws may use emotional bonds or the cultural expectations or dependency and promise of a better future to establish control. Because trust already exists, victim may be not immediately recognize the exploitation, and others around them may not identify the warning signs either. So the data therefore reinforce an important message: the familial domestic servitude is not rare, but is frequently hidden. The relationships that would provide care and protection can sometimes be very relationships used to be facilitate exploitation. So here we can how prevalent it is NRM data. So when we look at the natural reference mechanism, the domestic servitude appears to be a represent a relatively small proportion of referral. Out of more than 20,000 referrals, around 2% were recorded as domestic servitude alone, while approximately 7% involved in domestic servitude alongside other forms of exploitations. At domestic servitude frequently overlaps with the domestic abuse, labor exploitation, and other forms of control. As a result, the exploitation may be recognized under another category, while the domestic servitude element remains unnoticed. So that data therefore reminds us that the statistics only tell a part of a story. Many victims never reach formal support system, and many cases never recognized as a modern slavery. And why it is so underreported? There are several reasons why domestic servitude is so rarely reported. Because firstly, it is often takes place inside the private homes, away from the public view. Unlike exploitation in workplace or public spaces, there may be very few opportunities for the outsiders to observe what is happening. Secondly, the victims may be heavily dependent on the people exploiting them. They may be rely on them for the housing, immigration status, food, money, children, or emotional support. This dependence can make disclosure feel extremely risky. Many victims also have limited access to the identification documents, personal finances, or independent support networks. Without these resources, living may seems like impossible. So these barriers contribute to the significant underreporting and explain why awareness among the professionals and the communities is so important. So, difference between the domestic servitude and the abuse is domestic servitude is primarily characterized by the intention to extract labor or services from someone. The focus is on forcing a person to work and provide care or carry out domestic duties through coercion or threats or control. So, the domestic abuse, on the other hand, involves a pattern of behavioral design to gain or maintain power and control over another person. So, while these definitions are different, the reality is that the both can occur at the same time. A victim may be experiencing abuse from the partner while also being forced to undertake excessive domestic work without their choice of freedom. So, rather than thinking about these as completely separate categories, it is often helpful to recognize where we overlap and to consider whether exploitation may be present alongside domestic abuse. And domestic abuse and domestic servitude versus, like, when considering domestic servitude, it is useful to ask one key question: is that, is this person being controlled primarily to extract labor services or caring giving responsibility? So, if the answer appears to be yes, then domestic servitude is present. Someone may be expected to cook, clean, provide childcare, or care for relatives for excessive hours without pay, rest, or the ability to refuse. The exploitation is not based on mutual agreement, but on coercion, threats, and or fear of consequences. They fear the consequences. At the same time, the individual may also be experiencing domestic abuse. This is why professionals should avoid trying to fit situations neatly into a single category, and instead consider the full range of indicators and harms being experienced. So, in the overlapping indicators, the domestic servitude may also share identifying challenges. So, the common signs include coercion, threats, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, financial control, monitoring through technology, social isolation, and the use of children as a means of control, especially. So, these indicators are important because they reveal patterns of power and restriction in person's life. As professionals, it is often not one indicator that raises concern, but the combination of several indicators occurring together. Looking at the overall picture helps us understand whether someone may be living in a situation of exploitation. So, if we see multiple signs of control, isolation, and restricted freedom, it is important to consider whether the domestic servitude could be a part of what is happening and to explore the appropriate safeguardings and the referral or referral methods or the options. Thank you so much, and I will hand over it to the Juliet.
Thank Thank you so much to our consultant. That was very, very enlightening. But do we really know what we mean by familiar domestic servitude? Familiar domestic servitude is when someone is made to carry out excessive domestic work by either a partner, their in-laws, or even their own family. This can be done not by choice, but because they are under lots of threat or coercion to do so. This can include cooking, cleaning, childcare, like our consultant earlier mentioned, and gardening, looking after extended elderly or disabled family members, working long hours in homes without rest or sometimes without food, having no control over money or their daily life. So if you look at first glance, at first glance, it may appear to be a typical household arrangement, but the crucial difference is that the victims are forced or pressured into carrying out these duties rather than choosing to do them freely or on their own free will. And they are threatened by consequences if they refuse, or if they even attempt to leave, there's going to be consequences for them. We chose this, we chose to focus on familial domestic servitude with this community because as you've seen or as you've saw that with the helpline data, the largest recruitment method for domestic servitude was through familial relations, and second largest was through intimate partners. Additionally, the overseas domestic worker visa is already under scrutiny due to some recent high case profile. Moving on to the next slide, how do you spot the signs? There are many indicators to look out for, as mentioned earlier. Severe, as mentioned earlier, several of them will overlap with those that present in domestic abuse situation. This is hardly an extensive list of indicators, and one or two may indicate domestic servitude, but it is important to notice them and track them, track how many there are, and what to do, and to what severity they are, and try to find out if there is any interlink to create a bigger picture. There may be also physical or health indicators such as poor hygiene, signs of malnutrition, injuries or constant tiredness. Even there are some behavioral indicators sometimes which may present as being the person being withdrawn, avoiding eye contact when it may not be part of their culture to do so, and looking other persons to answer questions, or even they fear authority. So major indicators to look at for control methods, like someone is controlling a person identity document, or the person have restricted mobility, and if their day-to-day reality consists of excessive domestic work and lack of freedom. I'll be passing it on and back to Rihanna. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliet. Get back to our slide. So we've talked a lot about indicators of familial domestic servitude and the overlap with domestic abuse. So now we're going to put that knowledge to the test. This activity will consist of 3 case studies. I'll read them out, then give you a few minutes to put answers to the following questions in the chat. Are they domestic servitude or domestic abuse? What indicators led you to that conclusion? And do you notice anything else? As with any case study depicting violence, it's important to keep an eye on your own mental well-being. If these studies cause any stress, please do take a moment to step away from your computer and rejoin us once the activity is finished. Case study 1. After giving birth, a woman told her partner that she wasn't comfortable having sex due to postpartum pain. However, he forced her to sleep with him on a daily basis when he arrived home from work, drunk and demanding. At family gatherings, though, he acted the part of a devoted husband and father. She had no money because her partner controlled her finances. He told her she needed to have sex with him in order to buy basic necessities. Her mental health severely declined. Her partner attended all her medical appointments and ensured that she did not have a chance to disclose her experiences. She was only allowed to leave the house to take her children to school. So I've dropped the questions in that chat. Please go ahead and take a moment to answer them. Okay, I think everybody stopped typing. So this case is actually domestic abuse. And the reason for this is things like coercion, controlling behavior, not being allowed to leave the house. These fall into those overlapping indicators categories. The main point here is she's not being expected to do all the housework in this case study. Her purpose is not necessarily to be a housemaid. It is to just, her partner is trying to keep control over her. So this is just domestic abuse case with, of course, rape in there as well, which falls into that domestic abuse category. I'm also going to share the outcomes of these case studies, just for everybody's closure on this. So for this woman, she eventually fled with the help of police and a domestic abuse charity. She spent 3 months in a refuge before moving to a rented house. The police prosecuted. Her ex pleaded guilty to rape and was sent to prison. She is now a qualified dentist and volunteers to support other survivors who have been affected by domestic abuse. If you have any questions on clarification on these case studies, we can talk about those during the Q&A at the end as well. So for the second case study, a woman marries a man in the UK and moves from her home country to join him. However, her new husband is distant and unfriendly with her. When she arrives, her father-in-law arranges work for her, but she has to hand over all of her salary to him. She was not allowed to speak to her family back home without supervision. Generally, her new husband ignored her, but there was one instance where he drugged and sexually assaulted her. When she managed to tell her family about her situation, her father-in-law found out and got her fired from her job. She was then forced to do all the housework without being fed and fearing for her safety. Go ahead and put your answers in the chat then. Okay, I think the typing has stopped. So this one is domestic servitude, domestic abuse, and labor exploitation. And there's also trafficking as part of there as well. She was brought here for the purpose of working. That part where the father-in-law is making her work, taking her salaries, that is labor exploitation. It's only after he gets her fired from her job and forces her to do domestic work inside the private home that it becomes domestic servitude. And yes, there is domestic abuse in there as well with the husband who drugs and rapes her. The outcome for this case study was that concerned friends managed to get a mobile phone to her. She was able to arrange for her uncle who lived in the UK to come take her away. Luckily, she was able to keep her passport and go back home, but her in-laws were withholding the wages that they took from her, and her husband refused to return to India to go through divorce proceedings. That said, this case study is a few years old, and I haven't seen any updates on it. Hopefully she managed to get that all sorted out and is living the life that she would like to have. Last case study, a woman entered an arranged marriage with a man with initially high hopes for a match. She was well educated and moved to the UK looking forward to a new future. However, once married, she was told that he had married her so that she could look after his mother and his home. She was forced to cook, clean, do the washing, and look after other family members, usually from 5 a.m. to midnight. She was beaten, subject to demeaning text messages, restricted from leaving the house alone, socially isolated, and generally not allowed to do anything she wanted. last time for answers in the chat. All right, I think everybody's done typing now. So this officially was a domestic servitude case. In this case, there's not really a real relationship here other than what's on paper. She was brought here to the UK, trafficked here to the UK specifically for the purpose of taking care of the home and his extended family. The physical abuse is an indicator for domestic servitude, while also just an indicator for domestic abuse. But like I said, in this case, there's not really a relationship going on here. There's only that intent to exploit for domestic work. For this outcome, she came to police attention after neighbors saw her outside the family home in just a dress and flip-flops before her husband dragged her back inside by her hair. Once arrested, he admitted to enforced domestic servitude, for which he was jailed for 2 years, and assault causing bodily harm, for which he received an 8-month term served concurrently. So I hope these case studies have shown just how difficult it can be to tease out the differences between domestic servitude, domestic abuse, and other forms of abuse and exploitation. It's important to note that while each of these case studies involved a woman as the potential victim, and frequently a non-UK national, familial domestic servitude can happen to anyone, women or men, UK or foreign nationals, straight or LGBTQ, able-bodied or disabled people. Conversations with stakeholders have also shown that there's an additional recruitment method seen more in cases of UK nationals, and that is to secure access to drugs or to avoid homelessness. I'll pass on to Juliet to handle the next bit.
Thank you, Rihanna. Thank you so much. So when speaking to someone you suspect to be in a familiar domestic servitude situation, it is important to do so alone in a safe space, be non-judgmental, and try to avoid framing the situation as just a relationship issue. Keep in mind that when and how you're communicating with them, because if the exploiter becomes aware of your intervention, they may escalate their control or punishment method. Here are some of the first responders. There are some of the first responders you can contact if you have any if you come into contact with any potential victim. Here are some of the list. On scene is one of the first responders, the police, local authorities. Please get in contact with them. So if possible, report your concern to a first responder organization which are listed on the screen. Even better if you can get the potential victims to report to the first responder directly. That would be even better. The first responders you direct someone to depends on their situation, if they are comfortable with authorities and other factors. In our professional guide, which we will share the link to you on the next slide, there is a flow chart to help you identify which first responders to report to. So finally, if someone you have concern about is unwilling to speak to you, and you feel will not get another opportunity to speak to them again, provide them with the modern slavery and exploitation helpline contact information so they can reach out when they are ready or comfortable to do so. Thank you.
I'll take over for just the last bit here. So as part of this project, we've developed a professional guide on familial domestic servitude, which covers everything we've discussed today and more. You can access it by following the QR code on screen or the links that I am dropping in the chat now. We're also creating posters and flyers that can be placed in public spaces or handed to potential victims. These will be available in English as well as languages associated with communities at higher risk of familial domestic servitude based on helpline and NRM data. There will also be some materials designed for specific agencies, namely healthcare and schools. There will be healthcare specific posters and videos for secondary schoolers with accompanying lesson plans and FAQ pages for teachers. For more questions about what to do as a professional, you can see our professionals FAQ page. And for a quick resource to always have on hand, you can download our app, which includes signs to spot and direct ability to contact the helpline. On this slide, you can see the phone number and web address for contacting the helpline, which you can share with potential victims. The helpline is confidential, free to contact, and available in 200 languages. If you have any questions about the project or ideas for how we can better support professionals in identifying potential victims and getting them support, please feel free to send us an email at policyandresearch@unseenuk.org. And thanks for joining us today. We're now going to stop the recording so that we can move on to the Q&A session.